Hail and well met, traveler. Welcome to the tavern. Did you know this is the place where more than half of the greatest adventures in history have begun? But before those adventurers took their first steps, they watched and calculated who would join their party. Why, look over there. There's a mighty barbarian from the Frozen Lands. Strong, mighty, full of honor and wisdom. I happen to know that one. They go by Matt Rossi. And look over there to the right. That woman working away on her mechanical dog. She's cunning, witty, and I've seen her bounce more than her fair share of ne'er-do-wells out of here before I can even blink. I happen to know that she goes by the name Liz Harper. And me? Oh, my name's Joe Perez. And I'll be your tavern keep. Welcome to Tavern Watch. Hello, weary travelers, and welcome to Tavern Watch. Where we talk about all things in the tabletop space. I am one of your tabletop-friendly folks, Joe Perez. With me are my wonderful companions in this traveling party of adventurers, Matt Rossi and Liz Harper. How are you doing today?
Hello, hello.
I have spent the past couple of weeks coming up with D&D game statistics for various prehistoric animals that are not dinosaurs.
I mean, that is ridiculously on brand for you.
Yes. I'm actually hoping to eventually release this as a book. Like just, hey, you tired of the exact same 3 dinosaurs and every time you use a D&D, here's stuff that's not dinosaurs. But I might actually also put in like really obscure dinosaurs.
No, never saw that coming.
I'm just, Ankylosaur, Tyrannosaur, Triceratops, and Brontosaurus, and everyone's done. And nowadays Raptors, but they don't even get the right ones. So yeah, that's something I've been thinking about.
Well, we will go ahead.
If it's been in Jurassic Park, someone will make a D&D monster out of it.
100%. But we will be the ones that break the news when the Matt Rossi Dinosaur Compendium for various tabletop role-playing games comes out. Trust me. But we have other stuff that we're going to cover today with some other news stuff real quick, and then we're going to get into our big topics. So we did finally get a release date for Vox Machina Season 2, which is relevant to, I think, a lot of our listeners, as well as those of us here on the show. Looks like it will be releasing in January of 2023, so coming up relatively quickly, which is fascinating because that's a breakneck pace, really, because it feels like the Season 1 just released, right? Like this year, not too long ago. I'm asking you guys, question mark?
It was this year. Absolutely, it was this year.
Yeah. I mean, it could be that they were already in production for it, but yeah, it's really fast. And I'm not going to spoil anything, but Vox Machina has a lot more ties to Critical Role Season 3, Campaign 3, going on right now. So this could actually be a really useful catch-up.
Yeah, and that's something that I think is interesting. If you've been interested in the Critical Role stuff, and didn't want to go through the entire backlog, because there's a lot of it. There's a lot of content out there to consume, and it's not everybody's cup of tea. This is actually a really great way to do it, and I highly recommend Season 1. There is a lot of adult themes in it, as it is an adventuring party of murder NPCs or murder PCs, because let's be honest, they are the personification of what I would expect a normal D&D party to be at this point. But it's well worth the time, and it's well worth the watch if you're into that. The animation style is very good. The voice acting is top notch, as you would expect, and the story is actually relatively compelling. And they do a really good job of taking what is a long campaign, or at least series of campaigns and character growth and arcs, and condensing it down into something that makes sense, which is always a struggle. Anything to add with that before we move on to the next parts?
I will say this. Oh, no, go ahead, Liz.
Sorry. Certainly the problem with watching a TTRPG stream, whether it's Critical Role or anything else, is that because this is a live improv thing, this is not something scripted. You get low spots. You get spots that are not very exciting. You meander around. So I think probably the best thing about Vox Machina, the animated series on Amazon, is that they've kind of streamlined it and made like a really coherent story. Not that it wasn't good already, but they've taken all of those like rough edges off of what was an improv thing.
Hey, there's no Tiberius, so already, thumbs up.
No comment.
My thing on it is, this is not blowing shade at Campaign 1 or Critical Role or anything, but it can be very hard to actually understand what's going on in terms of character stories when they are presented to you in 4-hour chunks over the course of like 100 or so episodes. Like, think about like how much actual time it will take you to watch the entirety of Campaign 1. 400 hours or so. Campaign 2 even longer. So man, if they ever decide to do an animated show about that, yay. So in a way, like one of the things I thought watching it was that it's much easier to understand what's going on with these characters in this show than it is watching the original series, because there's an actual narrative structure to the show. And for example, I actually know what Percy's deal is much more effectively now. I had a very hard time figuring out what Percy's deal was for a while there. Watch these, boom, you will know what Percy's deal is. So yeah, I think it's a really good format, and I think it's a really good animated series. One of the better ones. I remember this year I was very much surprised by Invincible and by Critical Role, the Legend of Vox Machina. 2 shows I didn't expect much at all from, and both of which, despite having some really graphic bits in them, actually had a lot of nuance and storytelling heart to them. So yeah, I was pleased by both.
Yeah, there's a lot of compelling storytelling and a lot of compelling emotion in both of them, surprisingly. So well worth your time to watch if you that's sort of your thing. The other thing that I wanted to bring up, or at least another item that I thought was interesting, is that the RPG Kids on Bikes is getting a second edition. It looks like it just hit Kickstarter and is already fully funded. Normally, I don't like to bring up Kickstarters because various reasons, but it looks like it's already funded, which means it's going to be in production and print, which means you're going to be able to get your hands on it without having to go with it. But Kids on Bikes is a really interesting rules light RPG that I don't think we've really talked about before, but I know is wildly popular in human space now. I've seen a bunch of copies get sold. I've seen it be a really great introduction. It's essentially a choose your own destiny rules light tabletop game where you essentially play kids on bikes solving mysteries and going on adventures in, generic small town number 7, where it has sort of essences of whether it is it with like the kids like trying to go after Pennywise or Scooby-Doo or Stranger Things. It could be any of those, all of those, or none of those, depending on what you want. It's very narrative driven, and it's very much a basically powered by the characters, and it's all about collaborative world building. So I'm actually really excited to see Kids on Bikes get a second edition, because that was the first game that they came out with to good reception, and then they went to, this was Hunter's Entertainment, followed up with Teens in Space, which is exactly what it sounds like. Whether you are, on a ship or a space station or whatever, you are kids in space. And then Kids on Brooms, which, you pretty much can see where they're going with this. But those are really well defined and very good, and like rules compendiums that they learned from their mistakes and customer feedback and player feedback and sort of grew from there. So getting a second edition, I think, is really important. It's also a really great entry point for folks that are maybe on the fence about playing in role-playing games and want to have a rules light experience. So I don't know if either of you have played any of those games, or if this is something that was even on your radar before now.
I knew about Kids on Bikes because when I was introduced to it, someone said, "You remember that novel by Robert McCammon, Swan Song?" I was like, "No." "Do you remember Boy's Life?" "No, I'm not really up on Robert McCammon novels." But I went and looked at it, and then I went and looked at both Swan Song and Boy's Life, and it is very much like Boy's Life. Boy's Life is sort of like simultaneously a coming of age story set in the 50s with a kid on a bike. And it's also about, the Ku Klux Klan and racism and also supernatural evil.
Mm-hmm.
It's so it kind of had elements that reminded me of it. I haven't actually played it. I'll be completely upfront. It reminds me a bit of Quest. If you remember Quest from a while back,
Mm-hmm.
It has similar elements of just trying to make it as stripped down an experience as possible while still, it's still a game. So yeah, I I like it, but I haven't really gotten much chance to do much with, unfortunately. I don't know if Liz actually has seen it or thinks much about it.
This was not on my radar until you sent this link, Joe. But one of the things that I love about Kickstarter is the variety of TTRPGs you get there, and things that would not have been published through any kind of traditional publishing system, like Coyote and Crow, which came out, I want to say it came out early this year, but I may be totally wrong because time is confusing.
Kickstarter last year, physical inventory shipped earlier this year, and now retailers have it in stock as of 2 months ago.
So I love the variety of content we see because of crowdfunding campaigns like this.
Yeah, and Hunters Entertainment is no stranger to that either. There's some other games that I know we've talked about in the past, like Alice is Missing, which is an RPG played entirely via text message. That was one of theirs as well. They have another one called Icarus, which is all about how great civilizations fall. Maybe a little too on the nose for some folks right now, but it's there. And they have other things where they have survival horror ones where they, simulation stuff. But they're sort of all over the place and do a lot of really cool and experimental RPGs. So definitely they would not be able to do this had they not had wildly successful Kickstarter campaigns. Crowdfunding has really sort of exploded the TTRPG table space in a good way. Yeah. Absolutely a good way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty involved in quite a few of the Onyx Path now. Quite a few of the Onyx Path Kickstarters. When they did they were bringing out the 3 A books, Aeon, Aberrant, and Adventure. I was in that Kickstarter, and I got paid from them. They had me write a little piece for Wraith, their Book of Oblivion. So yeah, the Kickstarter is one of the reasons I even have some professional credits.
Now,
so yeah, I feel like we almost don't understand yet how much Kickstarter has changed the landscape for role-playing games, because it's sort of taken production out of the hands of a few big companies and democratized it in a way that we haven't seen since like the old days of Rolaids and stuff.
Yeah, so there's not to interject a little bit of a story, but I think some of our listeners will actually find this fascinating. So one of my employees, actually his father is the one that created games like Classical Hack, which was back in the olden days, you had like tabletop miniature wargaming and RPG version books that were sort of independently produced and produced in small quantities by whoever could get their hands on it and pay to have it published or printed and then sell it themselves at like conventions or in local stores and local communities. And that was like late 70s, early 80s when like that was sort of a thing before the big boys and big companies started really stepping in and dominating like print productions. And this is like the days of White Wolf and the original days of TSR and stuff like that. And then sort of that died off. And what this is doing is sort of taking that gate away that independent creators would like for the last 20 some odd years, 30 odd years, 40 years. Wow. Time flies. Where they'd have to pitch the idea and hope that, somebody would pick it up or try to publish independently themselves via Drive-Thru RPG or DM's Guild or Amazon or whatever other avenue they had, and hope that it got attention and hope that it did enough to sustain itself. And anybody who self-published, I mean, if I only knew somebody I could ask about that, could tell you it's an arduous task, and having to constantly hype your own work can be a little bit daunting. Soul destroying. Yeah. But now with Kickstarter starting to take up and GameFound and all and itch.io starting to really hit its stride with GameFound, with game making and giving creators the space and bandwidth to actually like get funding without having to pitch it to a big publisher, you're starting to see all of that variety come out again. And it's really refreshing. So, and to sort of move into the next one, the big darling of that one of the recent years is definitely Avatar: The Last Airbender, which has completely smashed all tabletop implications as far as Kickstarters go, blowing that out of the water. We've talked about that a lot. We've had that interview with Brendan Conway, but now we are getting to a point where we're starting to get the emails where it's getting ready for being sent out to the Kickstarter backers, and now it is officially available for pre-order. on their website. So if you missed the Kickstarter or didn't want to do it, Magpie Games is now allowing you to pre-order the books, the core books, for Avatar: The Last Airbender on their website, which I think is fascinating and scary because it means we're not too far away from having these things in our hands. And it's always fun and always terrifying because you always wonder, go ahead.
We really need to get an Avatar game going. We absolutely need to do this because I'm really excited about this one, but I don't have people to play it with except y'all.
Well, I think we're going to have to fix that. So if you're listening at home and you want us to do an Avatar: The Last Airbender game session, you let us know and we'll go ahead and make that happen. I may or may not have something written up for the time of Korra. We'll see. But are you guys excited about them coming out as well?
I have ideas. I have a great many ideas. I actually would love to run a game in the time period that we see in the distant past where the first Avatar comes about. I would actually like to run a game in that time period. There's a lot of stuff there, I think. But yeah, I was amazed. I was flat out amazed at this Kickstarter. Not just because, I knew Avatar is a big popular property. I knew that they would easily succeed at their goal. I was not expecting them to take their goal out back and beat it like a piñata that owed them money. But that's what happened. It's like, it was unreal how astonishing. Like, I didn't think enough people knew about TTRPGs to do this. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I just did not see it coming at all. So yeah, I'm looking forward to getting it.
And go ahead.
I don't think anyone saw that coming.
No, I was going to say Brandon, when we had him on the show, was even like, they were blown away by the response. Like, they knew it was going to be like good, like the response was going to be positive, but they didn't think it was going to be that positive. So like, yeah, it's amazing what happens when you hit on the perfect storm of something that everybody wants more of, and then giving them an infinite possibility of making it a tabletop role-playing game. One of the last news items that I wanted to cover really this week is that Desi's and Dragons is starting to get some international notice. Now, Desi's and Dragons is a group of folks that are basically in India and South Asia territories that are trying to make a concerted effort of bringing their cultures to the tabletop gaming space. And the reason that this is important, and Matt and I have talked about this on the other shows before, and we've talked about it here as well, representation of other cultures in tabletop role-playing spaces has not exactly been a great track record of positivity. There's been a lot of sort of romanticizing, taking out of context, stereotyping over the years, and it still happens today. So having folks that are involved in creating content from the various world cultures and actually saying, no, this is what it's supposed to be, or this is how it actually is supposed to work. Here's how everything looks, is important. And I'm happy that Desi's and Dragons is starting to get some international notice as they bring that South Asian and Indian culture to the forefront, which is something that I think has been largely ignored over the many, many years. So I don't know if you guys have any opinions about any of that.
I think both Liz and I are like, yes, that's a good thing. And then we're like, is there something else we should be saying? What else do we say about it? It's a good thing to do. Yes.
This is another one I was not familiar with. I don't have the pulse of the wider TTRPG space. So yes, all of these things are good. That's all I got.
I have a little bit of a selfish inroad because one of the main creators for Desi's and Dragons happens to be a co-star in one of the shows I'm on. So Indrani, if you're listening, much love.
We saw that with the Journeys to the Radiant Citadel book.
Yeah. That
there is an appetite for not just historical gaming, but gaming that touches upon, other cultures that are not well represented in stock Dungeons and Dragons, and actually uses them the same way that stock Dungeons and Dragons uses the Tolkien-inspired Western stuff. And I think we saw that in the past with, like, for instance, my favorite book of the past few years was the Theros book, which it was Greek mythology inspired, but it wasn't literally Greece with it wasn't trying to replicate any historical or even mythical period. It used Greek mythology and Greek history the same way that, your average D&D book used Tolkienian Western fantasy. It used it as an inspiration and as building blocks, but it didn't just toss real world stuff at you. And I think that Radiant Citadel showed that there is a lot of room for that. And I haven't seen Desi's and Dragons yet, but I think it's good to have it done by people who have an actual connection to it, as opposed to when in the 80s when TSR at the time decided they were going to put out, and it's not my fault, this is the name of the book, guys, Oriental Adventures. And it was, I mean, there was some nice stuff in it, and at the same time, there's a lot of stuff that that they only put in it because they saw a late night kung fu movie and thought that was Japanese because everything's Japanese to them. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's better now that we have people who actually have a real cultural connection making the work. I think that is just generally a good thing.
Yeah, because I mean, we've talked about it before. Representation does matter. Another thing that does matter, and it's something that I wanted to bring up because it definitely affects at least a couple of us on the show, if not all of us, is accessibility in the TTRPG space. That's another topic that's starting to get a lot of attention. With the gate being removed from content creation and it not having to go through like big publishers anymore, we're starting to see a lot of experimentation with the books and resources that are created. But one thing that seems to be, I don't want to say falling to the wayside, but maybe lacking consideration, or maybe they don't have the tools to have somebody vet it, is accessibility. Whether it is poor eyesight, whether it is poor manual dexterity, which is a thing that you know, companies like Wizards of the Coast are starting to incorporate in their design philosophies, whether it's color blindness or anything else that could possibly happen to somebody, as far as like whether it's a physical disability or a hurdle to overcome. Some of that can be a barrier for entry into the TTRPG space. I do think it's something that is important for us to start looking at, whether it is, and Matt, I don't want to like put you on the spot, but we've talked about your eyes before and how important it is for you to have digital tools that you can manipulate to accommodate your eyesight.
Yeah. I mean, how much detail do you want me to go into here?
I mean, not gory detail, but if you want to talk about your experience with it, I would really appreciate it.
What happened is back in 2016, I had a blood vessel pop in my eye. This was my left eye. Completely swamped out my left eye. Since then, I have a condition called retinopathy where the blood vessels in my retina are withering and popping. And as a result of this, my left eye is essentially no longer works. It's like a camera lens with Vaseline smeared on it. I get like between 4 and 8 weeks at a time, I go in and get eye injections, which means my eyes have a cycle of working really well, not working as well, working very poorly. Okay, I've just got stabbed in both eyes. They don't work even a little. Okay, now they're back up to full, and then it repeats. As a result, I have converted almost entirely to PDF. One of the cool things about working for Blizzard Watch and for being on Tavern Watch is that I've gotten quite a few D&D books from Wizards directly. They've sent them to me and I get to look at them, and that's great, but it's also horrible because a printed book is the worst thing in the world for me right now. It's very hard for me to read the text in a printed D&D book because it's very small. They make it small in those books. One of the things I love about D&D Beyond is that all the books are there. And if you have the money to unlock them, or someone like Liz is nice enough to like keep inviting you into their campaigns and then sharing their library with you, you can end up having it all on your tablet, and you can make it as big or as small as you want. Or companies like Paizo sell it in PDF format. Mm-hmm. I have a lot of PDFs, and I can, again, adjust the size of the PDF so that when we're towards the part of the month where my eyes aren't doing great, I can make it bigger, and then I can still read it. One of the problems with that, though, is that almost every book is produced either on white paper with black text or on really fancy colored paper that, like, trying to recreate a parchment look or make the layout weird to simulate a scroll or to simulate, the twisting mountain passages you're supposed to be climbing or what have you. You might as well just hit me in the face with that book for all I'm going to get out of it. If the book takes too much time and effort to read, I can't read it. And it's not a question of reading speed. It's not a question of vocabulary or reading context. It's that if I look at it long enough, I am going to have to go into a dark room, close the windows, turn off the lights, and cry for an hour because the pain is just too intense. And I'm not the only person who has problems with their vision that cause that. Lots of people do. And it comes down to, that's just one accessibility problem. There's also the accessibility problem of, with some products just being stratospherically priced. I'm going to point this one out. There's a game that I absolutely think is one of the most brilliant, innovative ideas they've had in years. It's by Monty Cook Games. It's called like Invisible Sun.
Yep.
Really interesting, really cool product. If you don't have $500, I don't know how you're going to play this game because it is expensive. It is a lot of money. And role-playing games are a luxury hobby, and they always have been. But the price has shifted way up.
Yeah, like to put in context, Invisible Sun is what, $100, give or take?
I think it's like 150 for like the
full
set.
The PDF version is $100.
Oh yeah, the PDF is 100. That's the actual book. It's even more. I don't even know what the full physical product is.
But I mean, and the other thing that I think I want to bring up here real quick too is also manual dexterity is an issue as well. Like Matt having his issues with his eyes, which I think we can all sympathize with, even if we don't know it firsthand. Like that's terrible, especially when a lot of TTRPG space is about reading or navigating books, but also like manual dexterity is a big thing as well. Some of these books get very, very big and are very, very heavy. Even the regular standard D&D book, right, at the $50 price point, because that's the standard price point for books right now, or at least the what is the expected hardcover price. And then you have to be able to hold that book, open it, and manipulate it. And there are folks who can't. They don't have the manual dexterity, or they lack the ability to do so. And things like having it as available as a PDF or an EPUB or something that they can put on a lighter device like a Kindle Paperwhite, for example, matters a lot. Or being able to access like something like you said, D&D Beyond, that makes a big difference.
Another thing to point out, Liz, you primarily have played D&D 5th edition, right?
Yeah.
Do you like how many hardcovers do you own or soft covers versus like electronic or through D&D Beyond type stuff? How much of your collection is physical?
Maybe 3 books.
And those 3 books are?
I have Witchlight and Strixhaven, and I have Spelljammer.
And do you have
that's it.
You got the core rule books, or do you get that online?
I don't have the core rule books.
Okay. Now, keep in mind that means that Liz does not have to do a lot of physical manipulation, which is great. But also think about this. D&D puts their core rules into 3 books, which means that if you need access to the rules in one of those books, you only need to physically manipulate that one book. The Exalted 3rd edition has like 1,000 pages in it.
Yeah, that's a thick massive book.
I've got it on my bookshelf right now. I kickstarted this thing. It's as big as 2 of the previous editions of Exalted. If you put Exalted 1st and Exalted 2nd on top of each other, Exalted 3rd is bigger than that. Exalted 3rd is bigger than the entirety of the 3 prime D&D books. It's enormous. I want you to think about if you have physical problems holding up the Dungeon Master's Guide, how are you going to keep that thing open long enough to read through it? And then the layout inside is all fancy again. So now the visually impaired are also going, oh my God.
Now
that's a thing that we have to kind of worry about here.
Yeah, and it's not that I want to harp on this, as I think that there's starting to be a bigger focus on accessibility in the TTRPG space, which I think is important, right?
Yeah, and I think that it's absolutely not the case that we're saying don't have special editions, don't have big rule books. Just make sure there's an option for people. Like Paizo used to have the really small books, and those were kind of cool, but the type in them was so small they were even worse for me. But I mean, this is the idea of have some other option for people.
To put it into perspective, like even like tabletop, or say like, yeah, we'll call them a tabletop giant. Like Games Workshop is even starting to acknowledge this fact, right? Where if you buy a brand new rule book, or what they call a codices, in the codices is a digital code now where you can basically input it through their application to unlock all of that content in a manipulatable form so that you can change the background. Maybe you can't do black text on white background, but you can do white text on a black background. Or you need to have it a larger font, or you need to have something like that. And it's not perfect. It absolutely is not perfect yet, but it's a step in the right direction. And so with the introduction of digital tools, with, Avatar releasing their set of digital tools, with D&D, which we're probably going to talk about here in a moment, moving into more digital tool sets as well, and really looking at that moving forward with their acquisition of D&D Beyond, and wanting to go into that table space, I think is going to ultimately, as long as they pay attention to it and pull the community, break down some barriers so that people that have accessibility needs in the tabletop space can actually have them. And I think that that's good for everybody, because one of my joys in life is sitting down at a table with a group of friends, whether it's a virtual table or a real table, and telling a story and having a good time. You can hear it when we're running games here. I'm usually laughing my butt off and just having a great time, even in the most stressful of situations, because that's what it's about. And breaking down the barrier that may be preventing somebody from experiencing that is an important thing for me. So hopefully we see more of that moving forward. Hopefully we see more independent creators take that into consideration as well, and start to really embrace the diversity of accessibility.
Well, while we're on this topic, let me just throw this one up really quick, and then we can go on to talking about D&D. Have you guys, either of you, heard about One More Multiverse?
No.
One More Multiverse is really fascinating. The one that they have out now is a demo for their Blades in the Dark program, and what it is like, imagine if Roll20.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
Imagine if like you have Roll20 with all the little maps and so forth, but it had a fully stocked pixel art where you could create your character in it with pixel art and move them around the map as if it were at a table that you were just at with minis, except it's this pixel art generated. It looks kind of like a really upscale Zelda game that you can play your D&D game in. And it's really kind of neat. It's really interesting. I just wanted to bring that up because it is something I've been looking at and something I've been messing around with that makes a lot of stuff that's really hard for me as an impaired person trying to use Roll20 so much easier. It automates a lot of that stuff that's just maddening in Roll20. So I thought I should point that out. It's even coming to digital platforms as well.
Yeah, it looks like, I think it's in beta right now. So
yeah,
that's definitely something for us to pay attention to going forward. All right, but I'm going to stop talking because I've talked a whole lot, and I'm going to kick this over to Liz because Liz was gracious enough to actually go through and start compiling a list of things that are coming in One D&D. As in particular, it was the expert classes and other changes in their latest playtest document. And if you didn't know, One D&D, which I will invariably call this D&D 1 before the end of it, so don't worry, folks, is going to be the new eternal format for Dungeons & Dragons moving forward.
D&D Series X.
D&D Series X, you got it. So Liz, take it away.
Well, this is the second playtest document that we've gotten for One D&D. The first one was about races and origins, and this is starting us on classes. And I really think all of the class changes are pushing things in a positive direction and aimed at kind of fleshing out classes and particularly making the lower levels more interesting and varied. And like, I know a lot of the campaigns we've done have started at like level 3. And one of the reasons we do that is because classes are kind of boring and weak at lower levels. And it does feel like they're trying to kind of address that. But perhaps the biggest thing they've done is break classes into specific groups. There are experts, there are mages, there are priests, and there are warriors. And each of the different groups, I really feel like this is kind of a gameplay design thing. They're grouped up so that they can, at a later point, they can say, okay, this feat is for experts, or this weapon can be used by experts, whereas they currently do stuff like that on like a class by class basis or a race by race basis, things like that. I'm actually seeing a lot of changes in the rules that are just kind of simplifying and codifying things that just are going to make it easier long term to understand the rules without having to reference lots of things all at the same time. But anyway, this playtest document talks about bards, rangers, and rogues who are all expert classes, and they all get expertise, which that is new. Previously, only rogues got expertise. Were there any other expertise classes? I think it's just rogues.
Rangers had something that was akin to expertise, but which was not actually called that. And so did druids bards had 2 things that combined acted like for expertise, and they've basically just called one of them expertise now.
And bards also had something like that as well.
Yeah, bards had jack of all trades, which gave them half proficiency with literally everything.
They also had the thing where you could pick 2
things. You could actually pick 2 expertise things, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So they just worked it into the class.
Yeah, now all of these classes have expertise, and they've all been expanded. I don't want to have all the conversations about this. Are there anyone, should I just go over the classes one at a time?
Go for it.
Okay, well then first up is Bard. and you'll find a lot of this is familiar, but they've made some changes to Bardic Inspiration, which I think are really interesting and are going to make it more flexible and make it a core part of the class, which I think is great because this is such an interesting part of the Bard. It's something only the Bard can do. So yeah, let's blow this out and make it a thing. One of them, you can give Bardic Inspiration as a reaction when another player does a D20 test.
That's huge.
Which is something Matt was actually trying to do in the game we played last week.
I was actually trying to use silvery barbs.
No, you were trying to give Bardic Inspiration as a reaction too at one point, but like it's good though. It adds an extra level of engagement, but also I personally think that was always a bad thing about Bardic Inspiration is you had to preemptively assign it, and you only have so many of that resources, whereas baking it into a reaction just seems to be more natural, in my opinion.
And you can also add a Bardic Inspiration die to any heal done within 60 feet of you as a reaction. So that's kind of another way to use it. And if a player rolls a 1 on your Bardic Inspiration die, the use of Bardic Inspiration isn't expended. Then there are a couple of other things at later levels. At 7th level, Bards get Bardic Inspiration uses back on a short rest, whereas right now they only get it back on a long rest. And way up at 18th level, whenever a Bard rolls initiative, they get back 2 uses of Bardic Inspiration. So
that's
in general,
amazing.
I don't think a lot of campaigns go all the way up to level 18. But yeah, this makes the feature, it's more interactive at lower levels. There are more things you can do with it. And at higher levels, it keeps gaining power beyond just the dice going up.
Also, by having the capstone be at 18th level, you can multi-class a little without losing the top end power.
Yeah, which is a big thing.
Because right now, multi-classing is it's one of those things where people do it because they know they're never going to get to level 20 anyway. But sometimes people are like, yeah, but if I do, we're not going to get that sweet level 20 benefit. And now at least you don't have to worry about it as much. You can take a 2-level dip in something else and still basically be considered a full bard.
And I think we talked about it last week. The level 20 capstone for all classes is replaced with an epic boon as opposed to that. So you still get a benefit from hitting level 20 should you go all the way in a single class. But it's nice. It's good.
And they're fleshing out bards as healers a little bit. You get something called Songs of Restoration, which at various levels, you get a selection of healing spells that are always prepared, including Healing Word, Lesser Restoration, Mass Healing Word, Freedom of Movement, and Greater Restoration. So no matter what kind of bard you are, no matter what kind of spells you pick, you're always going to have some healing, which I think is good. It adds to the versatility of the bard, and versatility that's the bard's thing. Being able to shift around between class roles. You're a healer, you're a melee damage dealer, you're a spellcaster, you're all 3 at once. And this will help with that.
I mean, we talked about Critical Role earlier, but it was really through watching Critical Role that I understood finally that the 5th edition bard is basically, we don't have a wizard? Okay, I guess I'm the wizard now.
Yep.
And that's something that by making it so you don't have to pick healing spells, you can take weird edge spells that you might never use, and thus they're there, and you still have the healing spells whenever you need them.
Which I think
it doesn't penalize you for taking the healing spells, which I think is a good choice. You still can only cast so many spells, but you can have these ones just there when you need them.
And that's
Plus,
huge.
the current Songs of Rest is pretty bad.
Agreed.
I think Songs of Rest right now is like what? Okay, roll an extra D. Whenever you're
a D6 on a rest. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I agree. Like, I think it's really good. I think it also is potentially going to diversify class structures a little bit more. We talked about this a while ago. I think it was on our first episode. It might have been where we talked about the traditional party structure, and we've had several questions about it in the past. Where like a D&D party is almost invariably based around this old idea of the holy trinity of tank, DPS, and healer, right? You have a meat shield, you have somebody who keeps the meat shield alive, and then you have your damage dealers, which are glass cannons.
Sometimes the 4th person is the person who opens locks and checks for traps.
Yes, but I qualify them in the glass cannon because usually rogues can't take a hit. Ask me how I know this when I almost died from one attack on last Sunday. Anyway, the problem that you run into is that you tend to have people that always feel like compelled to have a certain number of certain classes in a party where, oh, we have to have a cleric or we have to have a druid or we have to have a fighter. But opening up sort of that diversification for the bard eliminates that need. It's like, okay, well, the bard can heal if necessary, but can still focus on doing whatever else they wanted to do. They could be that rogue type. They could be that frontline fighter type if they wanted to. They could be the magic dealing sorcerer or wizard if they want to. And then if everything goes sideways, they can still go ahead and cast some healing spells. It means that a class that was largely overlooked, I think, and often maligned, the bard, now starts to look a lot more attractive to party structure because no longer do you need to have a cleric of the life domain or, you know, a wizard or a sorcerer because now you have options. And I think that's just healthier for the game overall because we often say, or at least in my group, we say, play what you want to play. Don't worry about, you know, the structure, but almost invariably people worry about the structure. So overall, good.
And one of the things about this is that, you know, some classes have a list of spells and every day they prepare what spells they want to be able to use. But bards are not one of those classes, and bards still aren't one of those classes in this new playtest material. They pick their spells, and those are the spells they know. So basically, if you wanted to have healing, you had to pick that spell, and that was the spell you always knew, and now you'll just always know it for when you need it. So yes, that is excellent. Does anyone else have bard stuff to talk about?
I mean, I'm just waiting to see when Millicent starts to incorporate some of this stuff into it, and then Matt just goes all sorts of crazy and takes over as the de facto leader of the party, because it's going to happen.
I'm the leader of the party now. What are you talking about?
Okay, then we will go on to Rangers, and I'm pretty hyped about the Ranger class.
I think this is the glow up of this rule thing, this playtest document. The Ranger is the glow up, in my opinion.
I think they've done a lot of good things to Bard, and of this group, the Rogue is the least touched. But yes, Rangers, I feel Rangers have the problem. It's like you go in, okay, I cast Hunter's Mark, and then I shoot something. I cast Hunter's Mark, and then I shoot something. And that's like the entire class. So it needed a little something. One of the big things is that they now gain spellcasting at level 1. It used to be you had to wait to level 2 to get spellcasting. Now you'll get that immediately. And that's kind of why I feel that One D&D is adding more for lower level characters, because you have to wait until 2 to get such a core feature of your class, but now you get it immediately. And Hunter's Mark, this is a really big one. Hunter's Mark has been integrated into the class in a big way. It used to be a spell that you had to choose the spell, and 2, you had to concentrate on the spell, which really limited your options. Now you will always have Hunter's Mark prepared, and when you cast it on something, it does not require concentration, which opens up a whole world of possibilities of other spells you can cast, other concentration spells you can use, because a lot of Ranger spells are concentration.
Also,
of course,
there's 2 other big benefits to that. Do you want me to say? Okay. First of the 2 big benefits is that you can, as it's actually, that's the third one. Liz already pointed that one out, that you can use other concentration spells. But the second one is hitting a Ranger does not do anything to their Hunter's Mark. They don't have to make a concentration check.
Not true.
So if you are a Ranger and you put Hunter's Mark on something, it is not coming off unless you go down. You don't have to worry that, I got hit in the arm for damage, but I rolled really terrible in my concentration check, so there goes my Hunter's Mark. I guess I'll have to recast it and use, that's not happening. Secondly, and also huge about this, is you don't have to prepare Hunter's Mark. It's always there. You always have it, even at level 1. And you can cast spells at level 1 now. So your level 1 Ranger automatically has Hunter's Mark and can automatically cast it. This is a huge boost to damage for a first level Ranger. It's an extra D6 of damage when many things you fight probably have 8 hit points and you probably only have 10. This is a big deal. It's actually much stronger than it seems at first glance, because it practically doubles your damage output at level. And doubling your damage output at level 1 is a big way to keeping you alive until level 2.
But yeah, it's we're going to see a lot stronger characters at those low levels just throughout this so far. I mean, I'm curious to see what else they do with the other classes, but yeah, this is an interesting thing we're going towards.
I also think this has a bit to do with making more classes viable and sort of further the diversification, because Matt and I have talked about this before. It's you like barbarians at first level have like a ridiculous damage output. Fighters at first level have a ridiculous damage output. And so you're almost invariably going to see one of them because they don't rely on class features as much as some of the others. They can basically just do a whole lot more at first level. Same thing with like clerics, right? Like a cleric of the war domain can put out a ton of damage because it already has a whole bunch of like special features at first level. When you're starting to talk about lower levels here with like the ranger class, rangers were a class that, and we talked about this before Liz decided to play one in the Weirs game. It often gets overlooked by a lot of players because it's not generally strong until later levels, and even then only in specific scenarios, versus what they're trying to do now, which is give you more options, make the class more attractive at lower levels, and sort of try to bring it up to par with everyone else. When Matt says this is sort of the glow up of the rules sort of update, he's not wrong, right? Like Rangers tended to get the least amount of stuff unless you picked a very specific subclass. And even then was overshadowed by a lot of other classes and a lot of other subclasses. So I'm excited for this.
Let's talk about for a second Liz's classes. The Liz's subclass is a ranger. You went with the Dragon Rider, right? Is it called Dragon Rider? I can remember what it's called. Dragon Warden?
It's not called Drake Warden.
Drake Warden, yeah.
Which is a character added in Fizban's Treasury of Dragons.
Mm-hmm.
And the Drake Warden does a lot to fix problems that the Beast Stalker had, in that they're basically their pet was getting wiped out and it just wasn't very useful in battle. I think that the Drake Warden, its mechanics are very good in that way. But it's one of the few ranger subclasses that had a lot of all around power that they could use. Them and the Gloom Stalker and a couple others. The Swarm Keeper, if you're really into swarms of things. But yeah, I feel like the changes we're seeing where you get spellcasting, where the various class features that are just straight up class features, like roving and tireless, are just better. They're the ones from Tasha's Cauldron, and they're just plain better. Go ahead. I'll stop so you can talk.
Yes, I mean, those don't currently exist in the base rogue. There are 2 features from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything that were really strong and did at least some things to address kind of the weaker elements of the rogue. And that was roving, which is currently now part of the base rogue class at
Ranger.
7th level.
You said rogue 3 times.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, Ranger. We're talking about Rangers, not the other class that starts with the letter R. Roving gives you plus 10 walk speed, as well as a climb and swim speed equal to your walk speed, which is, I don't know how often that's going to come up, but that is something that's gonna be useful. It
surprisingly comes up a lot in the pre-generated like campaign stuff. Like if you go back and look at like Saltmarsh, or even some of the stuff that's coming out now with like the Radiant Citadels and some of the stuff in the Spelljammer stuff, walk speed, climb speed, and swim speed matter a lot. And having a swim speed and climb speed does make a big difference. And giving that to Rangers is huge because it gives them the mobility that you would have expected from a scout type class, where they didn't have it previously. Huge, absolutely huge.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, having an actual climb speed on your character means that if you're going to climb something, you don't have to make a check. You just have a climb speed. Would y'all say that's correct? Yeah.
Unless the terrain is considered difficult or dangerous, you don't have to make a check if you have a climb speed.
And the other feature from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything that's being added into the base rogue is tireless. This, after any time you take a rest, you gain a certain amount of temporary hit points, so you're a little beefier after your rest. And it also removes 1 level of exhaustion after a short rest. Yeah. So, I mean, these 2 things really fit in with the rogue.
Ranger.
With the Ranger.
Why couldn't they have named him the Ranger and the Thief? Or the Rogue and the Hunter? Just break it up a little, guys.
I was just right there thinking that Joe mentioned Scouts, and it's actually Rogue that has a scout subclass, not ranger. So I'm getting everything confused in my head right now. But yes, these are really strong features that flesh out the ranger.
It also leans heavier into the Tolkien-esque fantasy of it, which sort of kind of got lost along the way. Like, this is a return to force of the ranger back with, I mean, Matt can correct me if I'm wrong, but this feels a lot like some of the kits that were available in AD&D.
It's a very second edition feel for the class. I would go along with that.
Then at 13th level, Nature's Veil, which lets you expend a spell slot to become invisible until the end of your next turn as a bonus action. So this is another really cool thing. It's going to let you sneak around more, position yourself advantageously, get some attacks out without being in danger.
It's also really useful comparing it to what it's replacing. I believe that what it's replacing is like hide in plain sight, where you have to make a check, but you can make that check like anywhere. And you can just, like, I can stealth even though I'm standing in a tree and everyone can see me. I can just become stealthy. This is like straight up, you're just invisible.
Yep.
And it's because you're just invisible, boom. It's much simpler and it makes a lot more sense. It doesn't seem ridiculous, which I think is important.
The current feature is hide in plain sight at 10th level, which says you can spend 1 minute creating camouflage for yourself. You must have access to fresh mud, dirt, plants, soot, and other naturally occurring materials with which to create your camouflage. Once you are camouflaged in this way, you can try to hide by pressing yourself up against a solid surface, such as a tree or wall, that is at least as tall and wide as you are. You gain +10 bonus to dexterity checks as long as you remain there without moving or taking actions. So that's pretty limited. That's a pretty limited utility there.
It's quite frankly, it's pretty bad.
When would you ever use this? I'm gonna hide against this wall, maybe to overhear things, but
it's very Assassin's Creed sneaking into a building thing, where you just hide up against a wall until the patrol leaves, and then okay, they're gone. Yeah. So I definitely think that's a much bigger benefit. For instance, one of the things that Nature's Veil would allow you to do is if you let's say you multi-classed into Rogue, since we've been saying Rogue a lot anyway.
Oh God.
But if you multi-class into Rogue, you could use Nature's Veil and then immediately get advantage on your next attack.
Oh yeah.
Which would give you sneak attack damage on it. Like, there's a lot of functionality to this.
It's interesting and dynamic gameplay essentially being added back into the class, which is, I'm always here for it too. And again, it just reads, as I'm going through this document and everything that Liz has bullet pointed out for it, it just reads as we realize people didn't play this class. You want to remember how awesome it was. Here you go. Because it is a return to force. But I think maybe we should move on to the rogue, since we keep saying rogue.
Well, I do want to mention one more thing. At level 15, Feral Senses gives them blind sight to 30 feet. That's incredible. That's incredible. That's way up there on the levels, but that's an amazing one. No other class gets something like that.
Your enemy goes invisible. Oh, tough for him. I know exactly where he is. I don't get disadvantage on my attacks. Yeah. I will point out one thing in your document. You mentioned that favorite enemy is still there.
Mm-hmm.
The Hunter's Mark thing is favorite enemy.
Yeah.
That's what it is. So favorite enemy still exists, and what it does is it gives you Hunter's Mark, without having to learn it and without having to concentrate on it.
It also means that you don't have to define what the favorite enemy is anymore, like you used to have to.
Yeah. So it's just whatever you've got Hunter's Mark on.
Yep.
Yeah, favored enemy was always kind of weird. It's like, okay, your favorite enemy is like dragons or abominations, and
so now you get a survival check bonus when you're trying to figure out what that dragon's going to do. It's going to breathe fire on us. We don't need you to make a survival check. Shoot.
Yeah, it was such a weak bonus, and now it's been replaced with the Hunter's Mark thing.
Yeah, and it's returning back to back in the second edition. Hunter, like, favorite enemy used to actually give you like bonuses to hit and bonuses to damage and a whole bunch of other stuff, and baking Hunter's Mark into it just makes more sense because now it makes you more versatile in that fact. Like, you're not going to just name, oh, my favorite enemy is goblins because they stole my bread when I was a kid, and then you never encounter a goblin, so that's just a useless skill versus
your favorite enemy is whatever sucker is in front of you.
Yeah.
Okay, so let us, in fact, go to rogues, at which point I will probably start saying ranger over and over.
I'm waiting.
Rogues rogues have definitely gotten the fewest changes of this. And not all of the, just rogues were a pretty strong class. The only issue I would have with a rogue is that they fall into that trap where, okay, every turn I'm doing the same thing. I'm going to attack. I'm going to get sneak attack damage. And that's kind of the big thing.
Mm-hmm.
And this has not really addressed that. Maybe rogues didn't need to address that, but one of the reasons I'm not in love with rogues is because you don't have a lot of gameplay choices. You go in, you stab something, or you hit them with a crossbow bolt, and that's your thing. That's all you do. So let's see. One thing, they have evasion has moved up a couple of levels from 7th to 9th.
Which is really good.
They get subtle strikes at 13th level, which gives them advantage on any attack roll that targets a creature within 5 feet of one of your allies. So that kind of feels like it expands on sneak attack, where you can currently get sneak attack damage on an enemy as long as they're engaged with one of your allies within 5 feet.
Now this is codifying an optional rule that's currently in the rulebook, by the way. So
okay.
So in the current version of 5th edition, if you are flanking or within 5 feet of an ally, like an enemy is within 5 feet of an ally, and so are you get advantage on an attack roll, but it is an optional roll. It is not codified. This is codifying it.
Mm-hmm. And I mean specifically for the rogue. At 14th level, their blind sensibility has been removed, and that used to...
It was one that will let you locate invisible creatures within 10 feet of you automatically, right?
Yeah. That's a little weak. And what if you're like a ranged rogue that relies on crossbows? That's not doing much for you. Now,
compared to the super great version of it that the ranger just got, that would have been really not great anyway.
Yeah, that's really weak. Now at 14th level, they just get a subclass feature, and we don't know too much about subclasses yet, but hopefully that means they'll get something more useful and relevant.
The interesting thing, though, is it also opens up for you to take a feat a previous level beforehand, because what is it? You get your subclass feature at 14th 2 levels beforehand, because you get a 13th with subtle strikes, but at 12th you get a feat. And if they have a blind fighting feat, you can now just take that feat if that's what you want your rogue to do, versus, just waiting on a terrible version of blind fighting.
Yeah, rogues get a bunch of feats too. They get them at 4th, 8th, 12th,
16th. Yep.
12th, 16th, and 19th. I think everyone gets a feat at 19th.
Yeah, don't they have 6 in total, I think? I think it is 6 in.
Yeah. 1, 2...
Yes, 6 in total.
6 in total.
Yeah, which is more than everyone else gets.
Yeah.
So, then at 15th, they get something called Slippery Mind. That's something they already have that gives them proficiency in wisdom saves. Now it also gives them proficiency in charisma saves. This is another one. I'm not sure how big this will be.
Surprisingly relevant, actually. So one of the worst things as a DM and as a player is having charm effects, because charm effects will either go against wisdom or charisma. And on traditional physical fighters, like barbarians and rogues fall into that category because they tend to be more dexterity or intellect based. Wisdom and charisma tend to suffer in those classes. And so if you're throwing a mind flayer at somebody, they're going to be saving against their wisdom and charisma, and there is nothing less fun than losing control of your character for an extended period of time because you have no chance of succeeding at the saving throw, even if it's a modest saving throw. So
and to compare that to if your DM is throwing a rogue monster or rogue at his party, and the bard just manages to get a good roll and you just can't beat their save, now you're homicidal maniac killer who was supposed to be the end boss of this dungeon is best buddies with Gonthar.
Now there's ways around that, obviously, currently in the game with legendary resistance and stuff like that. But
all that stuff's there, but it can still be quite annoying.
So this gives you a little more agency as far as like a rogue goes, where you're not necessarily going to be taken out of the fight, because this is why I classified rogues as like a glass cannon, is because rogues and fighters, if you can do something to put them to sleep or take them out of combat or hold person them, you can
cast maze on them,
completely nullifies their effectiveness as far as like what they contribute to the party, and can actually remove a player from the game for an extended period of time. And there's nothing worse than sitting at that table while everybody else does everything, and you have to hope you roll a natural 20. And while it is a 5% chance, it feels bad. So this makes it a little bit better. And I would not be surprised if other classes start getting little tiny bits like this, or feats are made available that do specifically this to give players the option to sort of beef up their characters.
There's a feat that already does that.
One feat.
Yeah.
There's one feat that does it currently.
No. You can take the Reliant feat for any stat.
But you have to specifically choose one, not two.
Yes, not one, not two, but it's still, there is a feat necessary for it. So there is something there already, but this is nice because then you don't have to use that feat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then capping off, you've got 2 abilities that have been moved down. Now at 17th level, you get Elusive, which
Good
means
change.
no one can get advantage against you. And at 18th level, this was previously at 20th, you get Stroke of Luck, which means if you fail a D20 test, you can now treat the roll as a 20. So you can do that once per rest.
So if you really just can't get through that, charm spell, even though
Yeah.
you've got proficiency, you still can't make it. Yeah, burn Stroke of Luck, so that way you're not, using sneak attacks on your friends.
And that really plays into the whole rogue being the tricksy fighter thing. So I'm kind of here for it.
So yeah, that just brings... These are still really high levels, but it's a little lower than it was. A little lower that you're going to hit that power level, which I think is a good thing.
And there's some other stuff like because we're running a little long on time here. Overall, these 3 classes feel like much more mature versions of the current ones we see, which is exactly what we'd expect, and makes me feel really hopeful for all the other classes moving forward. But seeing the expert classes sort of get a little love and attention, especially because these are 3 classes that don't get a lot of play. That sounds weird to say, but most parties that I've experienced in real life don't generally have a rogue, or almost never have a ranger.
Yeah, Bards, I think, are the most common of the 3.
And even they're very, very specific Bards get picked if they're going to get picked. So this seems like flushing that out is just a good thing. Do we want to go over some? Go ahead.
One thing I think is really interesting is the playtest document. Under this list of classes, it mentioned that the Artificer is an expert, but it didn't include it in the list, and it didn't include it in this playtest document. So that's interesting. I wonder if the Artificer is going to continue as kind of like an odd class out that maybe won't always be available, or maybe be in a separate book or something like it is now.
Or maybe they're just going to rework it from the ground up. Because one thing that I will note about artificers is they have a lot of overlap. They don't generally feel insanely unique. They can if you build them right, but for the most part, they're doing that same thing that Bards used to do, where they're just, you build them a specific way to fill a specific role. So I wouldn't be surprised if they're included in the expert classes. Maybe it isn't another book, or maybe they're just reworking it from the ground up to make it feel more unique.
Yeah, they're another hybrid class.
Yeah, they're like a hybrid class that gets the disadvantage of being a half caster.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't really get any of the benefit of some other half casters like the Ranger or the Paladin, both of whom are half casters. But especially now the Ranger changes and the current Paladin, both have a lot else going on for them. That, playing a Paladin, you don't feel bad that you're a half caster. But the Artificer, a lot of times you feel like, I can't really do as much as I feel like I should be able to do.
Right, because think about it. Like you have the artillerist, right? Which is, I have a gun. Fighters do that better. You have the Aegis defender, which is, I am a tank, where barbarians do that better. It's very much suffering from the hybrid tax is the way that I would put it.
They have some strengths. The artillerists got
Liz has opinions, but
I love artificers. I think
they're great
fun. Yeah, they have access to an interesting spell list. They have proficiency in thieves' tools.
Yep.
And I played an artificer a little bit that had a mechanical dog companion that it's because gnomes are small, you could ride the dog companion, and that was really awesome. That's not in the rules, but I had a DM at one point that let me do that, and it's I feel really amazing riding this mechanical dog into battle. I love artificers. Maybe they could use some upgrades, but I'm really into it.
I DM'd a campaign where we had an artificer minotaur who had a I'm trying to think of the right name for the animal, an aurochs, mechanical aurochs companion that I let him ride on. Yeah,
But I would like
mechanical. So I'm not saying that artificers are bad. I'm saying that, in my opinion, I feel like they could use a revamp in terms of the spell list they get. I don't see why they can't be a full caster.
I would agree, and also like I think they're another. If they were to be something that becomes available later and not in the core book, like they become available in another supplement, I'd like to see them come along with a more fleshed out kit, but also, and I was going to throw this in there, I always sort of equated artificers with my other favorite class that unfortunately has not existed outside of a single book in 4th edition, which is, it's going to surprise nobody who knows me, was the shaman, which was another hybrid class that sort of didn't do nearly as much as a druid and didn't do nearly as much as a cleric, and sort of they just did those jobs better. I wouldn't mind seeing some of the more esoteric or weird classes getting some attention and love and then being released, because I would love to see some of those older classes that maybe were in 4th edition get breathed some new life into for
like
One
the
D&D.
Warlock came along, but why didn't we get the Warlord?
Yeah, like we got the Battle Master, but it wasn't quite the same.
No, it's better in some ways, but it's not what the Warlord did.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And go ahead, Liz.
You go on. I was going on to a different topic, so continue.
I was just going to say, I think we should move on to the remaining stuff real quick, because we are running out of time.
One thing, a big change from the last playtest content is about D20 tests. The first One D&D playtest content had D20 tests. If you roll a natural 1, you fail. If you roll a natural 20, you succeed. That was not super popular, so they walked back on that. D20 tests work the way they always have. The DM decides the DM decides the check, and you roll and you meet it or you don't meet it. So I think a lot of people are going to be happy about that, including you two.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, I think I don't necessarily mind so much the idea of letting it succeed on a 20, because I think that they're right that you shouldn't ask for a test if you are unwilling to allow it to succeed.
Mm-hmm.
Like if the player says, I'm going to seduce that dragon, I'm like, no, you can't roll that check. There's no way this dragon finds you attractive. You are barely paramecium to this dragon. It's just not going to go for it. Other dragons, maybe. This one, no. So if I let you roll the check, then there should be a chance you succeeded. But I don't like the idea that Master Swordsman or roll a 1 and drop this sword.
Yeah, agreed.
The dude has been doing this for 500 years. He should know how to keep his hand on the sword. I'm sorry. So yeah, I don't like that original rule, but I do like what the thing they kept. Though.
Yes, I was just going to say the same thing. I'm really happy about that, keeping the gaining of an inspiration if you roll a 1. I think it's a great bonus prize or door prize.
Yeah.
So,
Sure, you screwed up. You rolled a 1. You missed. You hit the wall. But at least you're like, I'm really going to stab you now.
Yeah.
Rolling 1 is so disappointing. It just feels bad. But this gives you a little extra oomph, and it makes it feel less bad. It's like, okay, this was bad, but next time I'm going to really do better. It's going to be good. And kind of the last. Did you have something?
No. Okay. Please.
The last thing in the playtest document that I noticed was there are some new actions listed. And it's not so much things you couldn't do before, but it's setting rules down to certain things. Like one of them is influence, which of course you could always do a persuade check to influence someone. But this kind of really sets down rules for it. In the playtest, it says, with the influence action, you can try to influence another creature to do something you request or demand. This action can be used only on creatures controlled by the DM, and it isn't mind control. You can't force a creature to do something that is counter to the creature's alignment or is otherwise repugnant to the creature. And it just sets down some rules for it. Like, okay, is the creature indifferent to you? Is the creature friends with you? Is the creature hostile to you? And set kind of different levels that you have to roll in order to make a check succeed or fail. And I think this is great, actually. It sets down some rules for more social things in D&D, which is something it's always lacked. D&D is very combat-focused in its rules. So I think if you're a new DM or you aren't used to running social situations, you could hit checks like this and just not know what to do because there aren't any rules for it. You're making it up as you go along. And now there's several actions in the player's handbook like this. Another one I noticed was study.
Yes.
Which is basically you're trying to remember something and come up with an important piece of information about it. And it gives you a list of, okay, maybe for this kind of information, you could do this check, and list some DCs for different things. And it's like, yeah, this is great. This is going to make it easier to play social games and give you some rules straight up that you know that you can follow, and you don't have to make it up as you go along.
Which I'm really happy about, right? Because like a lot of this seems to be borrowing from other systems. I think Paizo has something like this already. But also like Blades in the Dark is a big one. Blades in the Dark has the sway action, which is, trying to get somebody to do something that you want them to do that, maybe they don't want to. But it gives
Come on, man, just tell me where he went.
Yeah, that sort of thing. And D&D always sort of had an element of that, but it was never codified. So having something in there that codifies that as a check, I think is actually really, really good, especially for newer DMs or players that are just getting into the game. And this is going to be the set of rules that sort of they go through and memorize. Same thing with study. I know Matt and I have always done this, where it's the player
just
doesn't know
this.
it, but the character does, right? So roll a wisdom check or roll an intelligence check or something like that to, see if the memory jumps out at you or leaps out at you. If you notice when Matt's running the Weirs or I'm running the Weirs, we'll work that in with we tend to use like history and arcana and stuff like that to sort of fill those roles to kind of keep you guys moving along, so that you don't get stymied by like the fact that we mentioned this in episode 1 and it's been 26 episodes now, right? So having something like that to remind folks, yes, as a DM, your job is to help facilitate the story moving along. Versus
there's literally nothing more frustrating than the entire party standing around not knowing what to do because they don't have a piece of information that somebody should have, but nobody can roll above a 4.
Yep.
And having the thing about the study thing that I find interesting is that you get to take time, you're studying the thing. So you'll get, to call to mind an important piece of information, you'll get a specific important piece of information. It's not just, if someone makes that check, you don't just throw any random piece of information at them. You give them the plot critical information that they need, that they're there for.
So like right now I'm in one of the games that I'm playing in, and which is a Witchlight game, by the way. I'm playing an Inquisitive Rogue, right? I'm not a combat oriented rogue. I'm very much, I'm a nerd. Like that's the character's whole thing. He's wants to be Sherlock Holmes. He wants to be an acquisition specialist. So murdering isn't his thing. Right. But, shout outs to, Amir, who my DM, he, does that where my character would know random things because that's what the character did. Like I'm from Strixhaven. I've spent my entire life studying books and studying the multiverse. So like my character is the inroad for random information drop to help the party move along. And so like we will do stuff where like it's codified where I've studied this before. I've studied this potentially. It's how like in the last game we got jumped by a pair of Wendigos and I knew, wow, we got to run the heck away. Instead of like, oh, I'm just going to fight this thing or we're going to fight. No, it's like, no, we need to go. Let's get like little things like that. And it helps a party feel more fleshed out and also helps a character feel, in my opinion, a little bit deeper. Right. It turns you away from just a bunch of murder PCs to having depth. Was your character a scholar, which is a background that has existed, but never really did anything. Or if you're an alkalite, it just gave you access to divine stuff versus maybe you're an alkalite of Ogma, which is a god of magic and knowledge. And you're just going to go through and maybe you've read this book somewhere, or maybe you went from the library plane that it does exist actually.
Maybe you're hosting some kind of podcast about role or in various games, and you suddenly remember something that you were talking about 10 episodes before, and you have a 20-minute riff session. These things happen.
All to say that it's really, really good, and it's nice to see them codifying this stuff. So I'm really excited about that. This is probably the most excited I've been with new playtest stuff in a while.
And it feels like it fits in with the theme of some of their recent books, which have had kind of a twist away from the pure combat, I'm going to kill everything in front of me, and that's the whole point of this adventure, like Witchlight, like Strixhaven. Because these are a lot more about exploration and social situations. And Witchlight in particular, you could go through Witchlight without killing anything or without attacking anything if if you really worked at it. And so yes, having rules like this is going to make it easier for DMs. It's going to make it easier for players to come up to understand what's going on. And it makes D&D more than a combat game, which I think is fantastic.
I mean, all in all, it just seems like everything is just going to be much better. It seems like it's being more player focused, which we know from talking with Greg, and you can go back to some of our previous episodes, they absolutely are trying to do. We can see that that's a shift that they've been trying to do in the recent books. And I think codifying it into the core rules just makes it so much better, as opposed to, and I believe Matt's brought this up before, Liz I know has mentioned it, having to buy extra books to get things that should be core rules feels bad, versus having them as part of like the core book when they tell you that this is all you need to play the game feels better. So I don't know if there's anything else to add to that. Your final thoughts, like, with us seeing how One D&D has been going, how do you think the playtesting is going? They're very clearly listening to their player base, but do you think that this is all starting to be positive? Is there something you hope we see in the future? And I'll start with Liz.
I think this is really positive because they're bringing up player power level, not to make things overpowered, but to bring up some of the classes that are a little less powerful.
And they're doing it at the low level.
Yes, they're trying to make the game more fun and interactive at lower levels, because that's definitely one of the weaknesses right now. That, if you're level 1, you are super weak. You could be killed with a single attack if the DM gets a really good roll. And, now you have more options. You have more things you can do. And I really like what I see about how they're kind of maybe normalizing player power levels. They're giving us more at lower levels. It just seems genuinely more fun. It seems like everyone's going to be more fleshed out, at least based on these 3 classes. One thing I do want to see how D&D handles this is subclasses, because right now a lot of that low-level power disparity is because some classes get their subclass at level 1, and some classes have to wait until level 3.
Yeah.
In this playtest, we got 3 classes that got their subclass at level 3, and that's how they are in 5th edition, and that's how they are in the One D&D playtest material. So I'm curious, when we get into those classes that have subclasses at different levels, are they still going to be at different levels? Are we going to normalize where everything is at level 3? Or are we going to try and give classes that don't get their subclasses until a little later and normalize the power level to give them a little more at those lower levels so they don't feel really weak when you start out?
All right, Matt, what about you?
More barbarians.
Nobody saw that coming.
No, it was mysterious. What would he say? No, I like what I saw so far. I'm glad that the ranger feels more fleshed out, like they get their spells at first level. I don't think any class that has spells shouldn't get their spells at first level. Subclasses is a different story, but for classes, if it is a class feature that you have spells, you should get those spells at first level.
Agreed.
And also, for that matter, I'm kind of not a fan of half casting in general, because it always ends up basically being an afterthought. I think that the way they're doing the ranger here is pretty good. But if the bard can be a full caster, and it is, despite also basically being everything else too, I feel like rangers and paladins could be full casters. And artificers. I think in general it is the one thing I would like to see changed the most, which I don't think I'm going to get. That's it for me.
Yeah, for me, I'm enjoying what we're seeing from what seems like a natural evolution of a lot of these classes. A lot of this, and I've mentioned this before, but this just continues to reaffirm it. It feels like a lot of stuff that players were homebrewing already, and stuff that you saw being released on, particularly like DM's Guild or Drive Through RPG as supplements, that like individual creators were putting out there that were doing a lot of these same things. And I'm not saying that, Wizards is stealing those ideas, but I think it's just looking at it and saying, here's where a need for players is being filled, and here's a lot of really, good ideas or things we should have been doing. D&D 5th edition is a product of a different playtest time, a time where people were really hard swinging back against 4th edition And so as a result, it reverted back to, and I think Matt and I talked about this when D&D Next was first released, and it was before we were ever doing the podcasting stuff together. But like just as a random off conversation of D&D Next felt a lot like it was trying to go hard back to second edition. And then what came out for fifth edition was like a hybrid between second edition and 3.5. Like it had a lot of the design ideas from both. And unfortunately, some of those design ideas were outdated at this point. Whereas like Paizo was already forging ahead with Pathfinder, and basically making a better game at the time. And now it's like they've finally taken stock of everything that they've created and a lot of the stuff that they've been incorporating into newer design philosophies in like Tasha's or in Mordenkainen's multiverse or in Fizzbands, and a lot of these books that have some really amazing and good content, and saying, no, we just need to make this part of the core grouping. And I think that's really, really good. As far as what I'm looking forward to seeing, I am looking forward to seeing what they do with more of the hybrid classes. Hybrid classes have always been like a personal favorite of mine in D&D. I think that they tend to be a lot more fun for my personal type of play style, because they can be very, very quirky. They can fill a lot of roles. And they tend to be mysterious. And something that is like, going back to the Shaman, one of my all-time favorite classes that they put in fourth edition. I don't want to say rare, but like it was uncommon in the world to get a shaman to go in adventure. So like having artificers and shaman, and I'm going to throw paladins in there as well because they are a hybrid class. Even though I think they could be a full caster, like Matt said, giving them more, like bringing them back, giving them a pass-through to make them more versatile, allowing them to basically fill whatever role they want to or work towards that, I think is potentially what I want to see. I want to see a paladin that has the option of being the radiant knight in shining armor, fighting on the front lines with like maybe some self-sustaining buffs, or the full caster, healer, protector of souls, or whatever you want to call it. I think that would be really, really cool if they give you the options. So I'm looking forward to seeing those. I'm looking forward to seeing what they do with the Artificer, which I hope is robust, and I hope it is really, really good, because Artificer is one of those classes that I've always been in love with, but I just always felt like it fell short of its full potential. And I'd like to see what they do with a full design pass with a new design philosophy. But I think that's it for today, unless anybody else has anything to add before we call it a night.
Dude, I have like another hour to add. Let's just go before I do it.
All right. Well, Blizzard Watch, and by extension Tavern Watch, is made possible due to the generous contributions at patreon.com/BlizzardWatch. Your continued support means this podcast site and community is able to thrive and grow. Blizzard Watch supporters enjoy exclusive benefits like early access to the podcast, a better chance at having your question answered on our podcast or the queue, and an ads-free site experience. And again, if you have any questions that you want to send into any of our podcasts, including Tavern Watch, go ahead and send those into podcast@blizzardwatch.com. Specify the show that it's for so that we can go ahead and incorporate that in. Even if you have something that you want us to cover in depth, please send that idea in. If you don't want to send us an email, you can go ahead and hit us up on our Discord server. We have 2 channels set aside. One for Patreon supporters as a way of saying thank you for helping us keep the lights on. It's the Patreon Q and Podcast Questions channel. And if you can't support us on Patreon, again, we understand times are tough and money can be tight sometimes. You can go ahead and send those into our podcast or Q and Podcast Questions channel. But also remember that if you can't support us monetarily, giving us reviews on different platforms, sharing our content out there with your friends, that's another way that you can continue to support us, because every new listener helps spread our word, and I'm okay with that.
Hype us, please.
But with that, folks, we'll see you next time.